What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video. Today is going to be one of the first of our two-handed build videos. This is going to be the two-handed stam DK video. So this is a pretty decent build, especially when compared to the dual wield bow build that I've already released quite a few weeks back now at this point. The two-hander versus the dual wield has always been kind of a contested question, and the two-hander is in a much better spot than it has been in the past few patches here. Just a couple of combined with the power creeps and a couple of changes to how passives work, as well as a nerf to enchants on one-handed weapons. Two-hander builds are actually pretty close to dual wield. Dual wield is still stronger, don't get me wrong. If you are trying to maximize your overall DPS, dual wield is still going to be the best option for you, but two-handed builds right now are actually being used somewhat frequently and somewhat commonly in endgame trials. For example, in Lokkestiiz, there have been people who have been using a two-handed build in Lokkestiiz to kind of help deal with the trash. Two-handed builds, generally speaking, are a lot stronger in trash than in single target compared to the dual-wield build. So two-handed builds definitely have a spot now in endgame PvE. A lot of stamina builds actually are converting over to a two-handed build when they have to deal with the trash, just because two-handed is just a lot stronger in those trash situations where you have a lot of ads or in dungeons. So, just like the rest of our build videos, we'll be going over gear, skills, attributes, everything you need to know to basically recreate this build yourself. I will go over the rotation a little bit on a 6 million dummy and then do a 21 million raid dummy part so you guys can get an idea of approximately how much DPS you can expect to see in an actual raid environment. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here first with our gear. So gear-wise, the body's pretty much exactly what you would expect to see on a dual-wield build. You have Velidreth and Relequen, all divines, all medium pieces, and you have that one large health enchant on the head. So pretty much cut and dry, pretty much exactly what you would expect from a stamina build. Relequen is still very powerful on a two-handed build, obviously. Then our second set, it's going to be a little bit interesting. So I tried out two different sets here. I tried out Tzogvin's and perfected Lokkestiiz, and they both pulled pretty similar DPS once you adjusted for the additional penetration. So I'm going to recommend Tzogvin's just because it's a little bit easier to obtain for some people compared to using something like perfected Lokkestiiz. You just have to have access to the Raststone DLC in order to farm the set here. But again, the DPS that I saw, at least in a raid dummy test, were pretty comparable. And if you have people running War Machine, then Tzogvin's will actually probably be very close to, if not beat out, Lokkestiiz. And the reason for that is that additional physical penetration on the Tzogvin's piece here. That basically allows us to more or less use precise rather than sharpened as our trait here. Which basically gives us a little bit more DPS. It also allows us to kind of shift some CP points around to adjust for the penetration a little bit. But you can use perfected Lokkestiiz too. Pretty much the exact same sets you would expect to see on a dual wield build are going to be good here on a two-handed build. So things like Hunding's Rage, Briarheart, those are all really good. VO is good on the body. So basically any sets you see on a dual wield build can be used on a two-handed build. The kind of thing that only changes obviously your main hand weapon, which is going to be a Greatsword. So there's kind of been a lot of back and forth between what's better, a Greatsword or an axe. And the general consensus is that the sword is going to be a lot more consistent than the axe, because the axe you're kind of relying on that RNG for the additional bleed. So sometimes the axe will pull higher, but the sword will always consistently pull very similar DPS across fights, versus the axe, which might fluctuate a little bit just because of that bleed RNG chance there. So definitely stick with the Greatsword. If you can. That doesn't say the battle axe is a bad choice. The two of them should be very similar in DPS, but the Greatsword again is going to be a lot more consistent, so that's why we're sticking with that sword there. Still sticking with the Double Ravage Health poisons here, and we are going precise on our front bar here. If you decide to go with something like Lokkestiiz or Briarheart, you will need to use sharpened instead in order to get up to that penetration cap. It's just really difficult to hit the penetration cap without dumping a lot of points into piercing if you're not running look at Tzogvin's. The alternative would be to, instead of running 2-piece Velidreth, to run 1-piece Kra'gh or 1-piece Velidreth there. You will be losing a little bit of DPS there just because you won't be getting the Velidreth proc, but you will be able to make that penetration cap that way, because you will be gaining back the penetration bonus with that 1-piece Kra'gh. And for a back bar, exact same as a dual wield, so dual wield bow build, Maelstrom Bow infused with a weapon damage enchant here. 3 Bloodthirsty, 3 weapon damage enchants. Again, pretty much exactly what you would expect to see on a dual wield build is exactly what you would see on a two-handed build. The only thing that's changing is going to be your weapon. So it's just a Greatsword, precise Greatsword with the Double Ravage Health poison there. I won't really go too much in depth into other sort of gear sets, just because you can kind of just take a look at a dual wield build or look it down in the description for sort of alternative set bonuses. I've already covered a few of them. Hunding's Rage is really good if you're just starting off and you don't have these sets already available to you. Briarheart's a very solid purchasable set, so even if you don't have access to Hrothgar, you can use Briarheart. You can just buy it off of guild traders there. VO is always a good set. The two-hand, generally speaking, has a little bit better sustain than a dual wield, but it also varies depending on class. So if you feel like you're going to sustain, then VO is a pretty decent option as well. And for DKs in particular, Deadly Strikes is not a bad set to go for, just because you have a lot of dots, so it does help out quite a bit here, and you can use that on the front bar because the damage will carry over to your when you swap bars there. So those are kind of just their sets, and obviously most sets you have Selene's. You can go one piece Kra'gh, one piece Velidreth if you're using something like Lokkestiiz. So again, all that's going to be either down in the description below, or you can find more information about them in the dual wield builds. We're going to try to cut the time between the start of the video and the end of the video by a little bit here, just so we don't have to end up going with another 35-minute long video. In terms of character sheet, exact same thing as the dual wield build. Any stamina build, Orcs and Dark Elves are going to be your best options here. Dark Elves is going to be best if you also want to play a magic DPS with the same character on the side. So if you want to do a mag decay, for example, you can be a Dark Elf instead. Just because Dark Elves do get max magicka, max stamina, and spell damage and weapon damage bonuses on the racial passives. Orcs, though, they do get the additional max health, so that does give you a little bit more survivability, just because you get that additional 1000 base max health there, so you can run that stamina enchant on your large piece rather than having to stick with running that health enchant in the first place. So Orcs, generally speaking, are going to be a lot better if you're just looking for raw stamina DPS. You get a little bit more max stamina, and you get the exact same amount of weapon damage as you would as a Dark Elf. Beyond that, though, you can also go with Redguards and Bosmer if you're looking more for sustain-oriented builds. So if you don't want to worry too much about sustain, they get 2000 max stamina, but they don't get the additional weapon damage. Bosmer do get 258 base stamina regen, so that is effective with modifiers, and then Redguards do get, I believe, 990 stamina back every 5 seconds whenever they deal damage. So the Bosmer do get a little bit more stamina regen effectively than Redguards, but both of them are very, very solid sort of resource sustain racer options. Then you have the Imperials, which are a decent option if you also want to maybe tank on the side. So if you want to be like a DK tank and also stamina DPS, Imperials get 2000 health and stamina, and they get 333 resources back every 5 seconds whenever they do direct damage, and they get 3% cost reduction to all abilities. You will need to have access to the Imperial Edition though, but it is a very solid option if you also want to tank on the side and not lose too much in the DPS department. And then finally, Khajiits are kind of the jack of all trades, master of none race. They get 825 across all 3 different resource pools. They get 85 stamina and magic regen, 100 health regen, and they get 10% additional critical healing done and critical damage done. So pretty solid option there with the Khajiits if you kind of want to get a little bit of a feel for all 3 different roles on the same character. For example, if this is your main and you want to be able to flex between those 3 roles, both DPS, healer, and tank. For resources, all of our points are into stamina here. You can put a few points into health here. It's going to be, I highly recommend maybe doing a little bit, maybe like 3 or 4 points into health if you're like a Dark Elf or a Redguard, just because you don't have the additional health passive that Orcs have, and as you can see here, your health is fairly low. It's 1589. With Ebon and with minor toughness, it will jump up to closer to 18k or so, but if you want the additional survivability, by all means you can shift some points from stamina into health. Going with the Shadow Mundus, as you can expect, it's still the strongest DPS Mundus in the game right now. We're using our Tam Takeaway Broth. This is for the additional stamina regen. You can go with Dubious Khemorran Throne instead. It's going to be a little bit weaker overall, so do try to use our Tam Takeaway Broth if you can afford it, but if not, Dubious Khemorran Throne is going to be your best option there. Then if you want the additional sustain, you can also be a vampire. You get 10% additional stamina and magicka regen as a vampire when you're stage 2. Downside is you do take more damage from fire and your health regen does go down. So you are melee DPS, which means you will be pretty much right up against the boss. So if there's enemy mechanics, you have a little bit less time to react compared to like a ranged DPS. So just keep that in mind. You don't have to be a vampire if you don't want to, but it's always nice to have that additional sustain here. Even as a two-handed build, you will need the additional sustain to really fully sustain a full light attack rotation. Moving on to our skills. So this is the bar that ended up working out best for me. So we have Carve, Venomous Claw, Noxious Breath, Executioner, Molten Whip, and Phyllis Dawnbreaker. So Molten Whip here is just slotted for the additional Seething Fury passive. We get that 475 375 additional weapon damage with Molten Whip for the most part. Then our back bar we have Brazen Caltrops, Poison Injection, Endless Hail, Flames of Oblivion, Rearming Trap, and Standard of Might. Now we are getting the minor force from Tzogvins here, but we are still going to be running Rearming Trap because it still does a decent amount of damage. One cast of Rearming Trap basically doubles that, so it's about 7,000, so it deals about 9.5k over 6 seconds, but you have to double that because you have 2 traps. So it actually is a pretty decent dot, so we're still going to be using Rearming Trap here just for the raw damage. But if you don't want to use Rearming Trap for the damage because you are getting minor force from Tzogvins, you can replace this with something like a self-heal, like Vigor if you would like, or you can put down something like Molten Whip, so that way you maintain that weapon damage across both bars there. Beyond that, I have tried out using the I'm blanking on the name, uppercut here, and it ended up not doing too well overall. This ended up being a little bit better. So basically the idea is, and we'll talk about this we'll go over the rotation, we do Noxious Breath spam up to a certain point, and then we're going to swap over to Executioner. So that initial hit here is 6803 compared to 4295. So at around about 40 to 35% health, somewhere in that ballpark range, you're going to swap over to Executioner rather than Noxious Breath. For our champion points, CP cap is still a 10, gives us 270 points. So we have 100 Mooncalf, 75 Tenacity, no big surprise there. Then we have 31 Shadow Ward, 31 Tumbling, and 33 Warlord. Play around with green CPs as you see fit. For our blue CPs, a little bit of a change just because we do need to make up for the loss of penetration because we don't have sharpened on both hands. We are using precise, but we do get a little bit of penetration back from running Tzogvins. We have 60 piercing, 49 mighty, 61 precise strikes, 52 thaumaturge, and 48 master at arms. You can flip-flop thaumaturge and master at arms if you would like. There's not that big of a difference when you're at this level of kind of CP distribution. Finally, our red CPs. Again, going for a little bit more balanced approach. So we have 81 Ironclad, 61 Thick Skin, 64 in both Hardy, and Elemental Defender. That's pretty much it for all the build information. So we're going to really quickly talk about the rotation on the 6 million dummy here. And I've already kind of mentioned it, so to speak, with the when we talked about our skill bars. Your main spam is going to be Noxious Breath up to around 35 to 40% health remaining. At that point, you're going to swap over to Executioner because at that point, Executioner will be doing more damage than Noxious Breath will be. So obviously you want to just swap over from using Executioner there. You're still going to be using Noxious Breath for the dot component, but you will not be using it as your primary spammable. The rotation itself is pretty much exactly what you would see from your dual wield build. So it's just do your back bar dots, go to your front bar, use your spammable, go to your back bar, and do all your dots again. Difference is the fact that we are not running Rearming Trap on the front bar here, unlike on dual wield build, for example, where you might be running Rearming Trap on the front bar. So we are going to be using it on the back bar instead. Generally speaking, here's what the rotation is going to look like. Pretty much comes in 2 chunks, and you'll get a better sense of it when we start the 21 million dummy pars. So at this point, you go back to your back bar to restart Flames of Oblivion. And then for the second part here, and at this point, Jen, you start Flames of Oblivion again there. So that's the entirety of the rotation. That's pretty much a static rotation because you're not really changing anything at all with the rotation, as long as you're not doing any sort of mechanics or anything like that. It's pretty much static. Obviously, if you need to adjust accordingly based on the fight mechanics, then go ahead and do that. But it's pretty much, I believe, if I'm thinking it through correctly, it is going to be in 4 different blocks. So you do back bar, front bar, back bar. You break your front bar to do Flames of Oblivion to re-up it on cooldown. Then you go back to your front bar there. Then you just repeat that. So it comes in 4 blocks, and I will write it down in the description below for you guys, just so you guys can see what it looks like there. So we're going to do a 21 million dummy par so you guys get an idea of the raid DPS, approximately what you would see in if you're like an optimized raid scenario here. It's going to be a little bit inflated just because we do get 100% major force uptime on the raid dummy, which is obviously impossible in an actual raided environment. But it should give us a good idea of where this particular build stands compared to a dual wield stam DK build. At the very least, that's I have done a few weeks ago. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here. So once you have all your dots going on your front bar, that is when you would go to your back bar. You do Rearming Trap or Flames of Oblivion. One advantage of running Tzogvins instead of Lokkestiiz on your front bar is that you don't have to worry about what bar you are activating orbs on. With Lokkestiiz, you would need to make sure to activate synergies on your front bar, which is just something extra you have to keep in mind. Not necessarily a bad thing, it's just something on top of, having to worry about your rotation and things like that. So you will notice that I did continue to use Poison Injection as my last ability on my back bar. Do try to doing that. Try to do that. Even if you have to use standard, your ultimate on the back bar there. You can see here that the two-handed build, even though we are getting a little bit better sustain compared to the dual build, is still a little bit difficult to sustain. Part of it is because stam DKs do have a little bit worse sustain compared to some of the other classes in the game. So you shouldn't expect to see the same sort of level of sustain across all two-handed builds. So at this point here, we're going to swap over to Executioner. Oops, it did not hit my breath there. So we are going to use Noxious Breath here just for the dot, and then we're going to swap over to Executioner as a spamble here. I might use Dawnbreaker to fully sustain the rotation. Yeah, I'm gonna use Dawnbreaker. I'll need those resources back. So yeah, don't be afraid to use a Dawnbreaker to get resources back. It's not ideal. Try to save it for standard if you can. There's no shame in doing that though. Let's finish you off here. And there we go. That is the full rotation. And again, it's a static rotation, so I will write it down in the description below for you guys to follow there. But here is the overall DPS. So we pulled 80.7k. So a little bit lower than our dual wield. Let me just really quickly double check what I managed to get on the dual wield build here. I believe it was a little bit closer to 84 if I'm remembering correctly. Might actually be higher. Let me see here. It should be. Yeah, so the dual wield build pulled about 83k or so. So not that far off. We're about 3k off. So pretty decent nonetheless. And do keep in mind that the dual wield build was with Lokkestiiz, so we did have the Major Slayer. So if you consider that we're using Tzogvins instead of Lokkestiiz, so we don't have any sort of Major Slayer, it's actually pretty nice overall. And again, two-handed builds are actually very strong in sort of trash setups. So you do see endgame raiders using two-handed builds when they're going through trash, either in a dungeon or a trial. So definitely I'd recommend taking a look at this if you're kind of getting tired of the whole dual wield bow build. So that is it for this build video. Hope you guys found this informative. If you guys have any questions at all, please feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll catch you guys in the next dungeon.